Hello, I am Dylan.
And I'm Keelan.
This is Triple Play, that podcast where we commit a crime right after we get out of prison. Because this month we watched the Oceans trilogy.
Written by Ted Griffin, George Nolfi, Brian Koppelman, and David Levien.
And they were all directed by Steven Soderbergh. I got the easy job this time.
And released in 2001, 2004, and 2007.
Right. So we usually start with how many times we've seen these movies, and
0.
I have seen them never.
Yep, same
This is
here.
the first time
Never
watching
seen
these
any of them.
movies.
I knew of their existence.
I
We're
knew
not
of their
so far down
existence.
the rabbit hole yet that we're watching movies that we didn't know about before we watched them for the podcast.
Well, I've always wanted to watch these movies. They've always been on my list as something that I've wanted to watch, and I've never really just found an opportunity. So it was good that we found an excuse to watch it for this podcast. If you didn't know, that excuse is that all-female spin-off / soft reboot / I don't really
Sequel.
know, sequel, Oceans 8, which is coming out, I think, in May.
And if that one does well, we'll have another trilogy to cover for the Oceans franchise.
Yeah, in 3 years, in 6 years, actually, since they usually take 2 years to make movies.
Or even longer, depending on complications in making the movies.
Contract negotiations. Yeah, well, anyway, yeah, so that's why we're doing the Oceans trilogy. And also, Steven Soderbergh still makes movies like every year. He makes like a movie a year. Last year it was Logan Lucky, which is another heist film. And this year was Unsane, which is a movie he filmed entirely on an iPhone. So that's kind of neat.
Huh.
Steven Soderbergh is an interesting director because he likes to really experiment a lot with his movies. He does a lot
As
of
we'll see when
really
we start talking about Oceans 12.
experimental things with his movies and his directing and everything in them, basically. But anyway, Oceans 11 is not an original story. Oceans 11 is a remake
Of a movie that came out in the 60s.
a movie that came out in the 60s that had Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and the whole group, the Rat Pack.
Yeah, a group known as the Rat Pack. I didn't necessarily... I mean, I knew of all these people, or at least most of them. I didn't really know what the Rat Pack was until looking it up for this.
Right.
But it's just a coalition of these guys.
These performers who all performed in I guess, Vegas, or just in general around that time.
Just in general.
And sometimes together, sometimes
together,
not.
right.
I didn't actually know Frank Sinatra acted in movies. I had only ever thought of him only as a singer, but apparently he plays Danny Ocean in Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
So
I Oceans 11, the original one, happened to be on TV a couple weeks ago, so I just caught a little bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, since we bring it up now, we're going to be watching that for our 0.5 episode after this. So for supplemental
next
Oceans
month.
material, we'll be watching that.
And
they just, Soderbergh and a couple other people, I guess, decided that they wanted to reboot Oceans 11.
Well,
Soderbergh, this is specifically Soderbergh speaking, he said he wanted to make it better than the original because he felt that the original wasn't that well made, basically.
Well, I guess next month we can be the judge of that. But I think one of the main people who was the big thrust behind this whole thing, I guess, was producer Jerry Weintraub.
Weintraub, I think. I pronounced it Weintraub. And he's produced a ton of movies, most of which are really famous. I didn't even know his name before looking him up for this, but he's produced dozens of movies that are super famous.
Right. He's like a big producer in Hollywood, like a big, well-known producer, and he's produced a lot of movies and
basically enabled Ocean's 11 to get made. If it wasn't for him, it probably wouldn't have gotten made.
I mean,
in the way that it was made.
If they would get it made without him, there's no way it would look like it did, because Jerry's influence is like the main reason why Ocean's 11
was able to be filmed in Vegas.
Was able to be filmed in the Bellagio, basically 24/7. Steven Soderbergh talked about it quite a bit, but I guess we usually start with casting, and I feel like casting for this movie wasn't super interesting, but it was a little difficult because I had to find 11 people to cast in main roles, right? There's 11 lead roles in the first movie.
Right, and there are a lot of big names in this too, right? Like George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, who was starting to be big around this time.
Yeah, because The Bourne Identity came out
a month or two before this.
Yeah.
So it would have been
Don Cheadle, who's like a lot bigger now than he was back then.
Right. Don Cheadle, I think, is more of a TV actor, if I know my stuff
I think
correctly.
so. Scott Kahn, who plays one of the two brothers, is definitely a TV actor, more so than a movie actor. He's on Hawaii Five-O and has been for the past like 6 years. That show's still running. There's also Julia
Yeah,
Roberts
Julia Roberts.
as Tess Ocean. Later on, there's Al Pacino in the third one, who's like a really big name. Who else is in the first one they got that I'm forgetting? Casey Affleck plays the other brother. That's Ben Affleck's brother. Eddie Izzard is Roman.
I don't even know who Eddie Izzard is.
Andy Garcia is Terry Benedict. Andy Garcia is a name I recognize, but not a face. So I guess that's kind of a bummer. Apparently, Bruce Willis was originally one of the people lined up to play Danny Ocean, but he turned it down. Luke and Owen Wilson were going to play the brothers in the movie, which would have been, I guess, kind of interesting to have two brothers play brothers in the movie, but they had to turn it down because they were playing brothers in another movie called The Royal Tenenbaums.
Yeah.
Which is a movie I actually really, really like.
Yeah, isn't that directed by
Wes Anderson?
Yeah, Wes Anderson.
Yeah. It was the only Wes
came
Anderson.
out with I Love Dogs or I Love Dogs.
Yeah, 100% intentional. Royal Tenenbaums was the only Wes Anderson movie I had seen before I saw I Love Dogs. So.
Which is being not accused, but is like under scrutiny right now because a lot of people consider it a cultural appropriation, or they don't like how it portrays like Japanese and East Asian stuff in general.
I don't really understand the argument. Having seen the movie, I don't really understand the.
Well, I haven't seen it,
arguments.
so I don't, and I probably will never see it, so I don't have anything to say about it.
It's just like a lot of the movies, like very intentionally references Kurosawa, who we've talked on this podcast before, because in Seven Samurai.
And Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah, exactly. So, a lot of Isle of Dogs is a lot of intentional homage and reference to Kurosawa films. So, anyway, this is not an Isle of Dogs podcast. This is an Oceans 11, 12, and 13 podcast. So, I mean, Steven Soderbergh talked about how it was difficult to find people to cast because this movie there isn't like one main character in this movie. I mean, Danny and Rusty are kind of the two leads.
Well, once we get into 12 and 13, it's basically Danny, Rusty, and Matt Damon's character.
Linus.
Linus are basically the main three.
But he talked a lot about how the first movie was difficult to cast because of that, because he needed to find an ensemble
cast
of 11 people who all worked really well together and all were able to pull off all of this chemistry between everyone, because there's a lot of big character relations, there's a lot of big names, and there's a lot of little chemistry things between all the characters that needed to be pulled off, and he said that it was really difficult to put together an 11-person cast that could do that.
He also said that it would have been really easy for the characters, not easy is not the right word, it would have been maybe sort of typical, or he would have expected a few of the characters, maybe some of the more main characters like George Clooney, Brad Pitt, to sort of want to take over the scene or have their own sort of scenes, but he was surprised and really happy with how the actors, he uses the term giving each other scenes. I think that's a sort of standard term you use in acting.
Right.
But he was impressed with how nobody was really trying to overtake anyone else. No one was trying to make the movie all about them, and they all understood that it was an ensemble cast and they had to work together to make the movie work.
Right.
Although I think part of that, and he didn't say this is me talking, I think part of that is, letting Clooney and Brad Pitt, have a little bit more presence in some of the scenes, because they definitely did.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're if you look at the 11, they're definitely the two ringleaders, right?
Yeah, they are.
They're definitely the two running the whole operation.
Yep.
And that's kind of why Linus becomes more of a main character in the next two, because he starts to run the operation a little bit too, because he wants to get in the game, right? But, ensemble movies are really difficult, I think, to pull off. I think, Alien was a good one, a good ensemble movie, because they just slowly kept killing characters off.
Yeah, a lot of horror movies, because a lot of them just kill people off incrementally, are pretty interesting. And there's this one, I forget what this is called, but it was recently released, I think maybe last year. It's sort of this, I don't know how it's indie movie, I guess. So I don't know if I even like that term. It's I forget what it's called too, but it's about these people are playing this game and they get killed. One person gets killed off every 2 minutes or something, and it seems really interesting. I haven't watched it.
Trying to remember, but I don't remember the name.
Yeah.
I know what movie you're talking about.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they got the cast together, got everything working there, and then they're like, where we should film? Las Vegas, because we know where this movie takes place. Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, so movies that are filmed in Vegas, typically, if you're filming in a Vegas casino, there's like a lot of restrictions on what you can film and where you can film and when you can film. And
And Weintraub was able to bypass a lot of those.
yeah, so like a lot of the restrictions are like, oh, you're not allowed to film on the casino floor when people are on the floor. You're not allowed to film during the daytime. You basically have to film at night. If you do anything overnight, it has to be down by the next day so the casino can continue running.
Right.
A lot of restrictions that are really difficult to navigate around if you're trying to film a movie that's basically entirely set inside the Bellagio, right? Thankfully, Jerry Weintraub has a lot of influence, and apparently the Bellagio staff were like really, really excited to be working on this film, and they basically let the crew film whenever and wherever they wanted. They were like really impressed, and Steven Soderbergh was like really happy that they let him film like when the floor was like full of people.
Yeah, we while we were watching this, we were like, I wonder if this was actually, done in the Bellagio or in a Vegas casino, or if it was just a set, right? And it's kind of both of those. They built sets in the casinos, which once you dig into like the restrictions that casinos have and stuff, you realize how like big of a deal this was that they were allowed to do this, that they were allowed to actually build these things in the casinos and like have them there.
Right.
Because you mentioned how, things have to be down, like they have to be put up overnight and they have to be like down or out of there or deconstructed by the time the casino reopens again.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to bypass that for this movie. They left up their sets.
Yeah, one of the restaurants let them build like an entirely fake wall in front of the restaurant and a fake facade for something else that was like key to one of the scenes, and they let them leave it up for like an entire day. Just like other things too, like they did build sets. They built, the villa set was like a set that
Villa?
they built.
Good Blake 7 character?
They built like a set for the hotel room they were staying in, and they talked about how one of the crew members or one of the producers thought it was such a good set. They were like sitting on the couch, and they picked up the menu off the table to try order room service on the set, except the set wasn't like in the Bellagio, it was like on the soundstage.
Yeah, other filming locations, what's his face's backyard that Ruben's backyard is in Palm Springs, California.
Right.
And I think there were a couple other ones too, but most of it was actually done in Las Vegas, either on a
Most of it
set
was
in
done
Las
in
Vegas
Vegas.
or in the actual casino itself.
For some of the flashbacks, they looked for other casinos that looked like the decade they were going for that flashback. They talked about how they filmed a flashback for the 90s, the 80s, and the 70s, and they did a lot of research about what casinos were big on the strip in those years, and then what casino could they find, or what location or what set could they build that looked a lot like those casinos did in those days.
Yeah, those flashbacks are great when they try and do the same thing in the third one, and no, it just doesn't work.
Well, so there's also another thing about the Bellagio let them do, which is like a big deal, which is that the Bellagio basically let them. There's a scene in the first one where they're in the eye in the sky, right? They're in the security room basically, and that's a set because apparently the real room is like really cramped and has a lot more TV monitors and a lot more people watching, but they needed like a wide open set for the effect they were going for with Terry Benedict, right? But apparently the Bellagio basically gave them like 2 days worth of actual security footage from the actual casino and said they could use it in the scene as long as they just used footage where you couldn't see people's faces and you just only saw the backs or crowd shots. And that was like a really big deal too, because it gave them like actual legitimate footage of the casino floor to use in the movie.
Yeah, it's cool.
Instead of having to find like a bunch of extras and then film them at like fake slot machines for security footage for the eye in the sky. Also, costuming for the first movie, I was reading, apparently they came up, they started from this idea that each character had like some color or some style that was specific to them, and then they developed multiple costume changes throughout the movie. I think Ocean has something like 20 costumes over the course of the first movie I read.
Right. If you don't know, this movie takes place over the course of like about a week, maybe a little more.
I think it's 2 weeks,
2
right?
weeks, something like
because
that. The second one's
fight
2
night,
weeks.
Fight night is in 2 weeks, I think, in the first movie. And I think that's why it's 2 weeks in the second movie too, because they just wanted to replicate that time scale from the first one.
So it's a pretty short amount of time. Mm-hmm. But there are more costumes in this short amount of time in this movie than a lot of movies have in the entire movie that takes place over maybe months.
Right.
So it was really nice attention to detail, right? Like these characters don't wear the same thing every day.
Yeah, they change, and the costume designer apparently had like a kind of difficult time coming up with so many costume changes for so many different characters. But I think it worked in the movie. I think it's actually I think what works about it is that you really can tell that every character has their own
Yeah,
style
they do. In
and of
basically
dress.
in this one alone, that's kind of abandoned in
Hmm.
12 and 13. But in this one, yeah, it's very apparent, really great, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's good
Done
attention
well.
to
Yeah, it's done
detail.
well.
There's
It's
a lot of attention to detail in the first movie, especially when they build that fake vault in that warehouse, There's just a lot of attention to detail, especially when they had to build sets to replicate some parts of the Bellagio floor when they had to, do reshoots, or if they needed a certain shot that wasn't possible on the actual floor. There was a lot of care and effort put into making sure it looked exactly like the actual floor of the Bellagio. And yeah, so it's in general, the first movie was a lot of it was a very detail oriented movie, I think.
sure.
From the casting to the sets to the costumes, a lot of details that had to be worked out. And I think, quite frankly, they didn't expect that movie to be as big a success as it was,
Yeah, no.
because it was actually made on like a pretty small budget. And that was another thing about the casting, is that Soderbergh was like, we have a pretty small budget, so the fact that we could even get 11 people in the movie, 11 like
Much less
semi
big
big
names.
names in the movie, was like a really big deal because of the low budget we had. So
Yeah. But the
so
movie came out, and like we mentioned, it was pretty big.
yeah, like I said, I really don't think they expected it to be that big of a success.
Especially because the first one was well known, but not
Hmm.
not really a favorite movie of many people, I think.
Yeah, I think Soderbergh also said something like, going back to how you said he thinks it isn't that great. I think he said something like he thinks people just like it because it's an old movie, and that people think that's what you're supposed to do, is like old movies, and that it's actually not that great when you sit down and watch it. That's why you wanted to do it better.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, but that is the thing, right? Like, some people will be like, "Oh yeah, really like that." Insert really old movie here, because like you only remember the old movies that are great, right?
Or,
No,
or,
nobody's gonna remember that movie that opened opposite Oceans 11 that same weekend.
or you just want to show people how knowledgeable and how knowledgeable you are and like how good your taste is. Like, yeah, I watch old movies. I like old stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Godfather, really good movie. I haven't watched The
Yeah. I haven't
Godfather.
watched The Godfather either. Something we'll be getting to in this podcast eventually.
Eventually. So the second movie,
They started making another one because Ocean's 11 was so big. And they're like, hey, we can do this again.
that's kind of the story with every movie on this podcast. Yeah, the first one was really big, so they started making a second one. I guess it doesn't surprise me
But we should
anymore.
also mention how they like appropriated a script from another movie.
Yeah, I don't actually know the full details of the story.
Yeah, I don't remember what this movie was called, but Weintraub, I think, was working with this. He was producing this. He was going to produce this other movie, which whose plot was basically Ocean's 11. It had a lot to do with like the metafictional weird stuff that goes on in Ocean's 12. Ocean's 12. And he read the script, and he's like, hey, you know what? This would be a good script for Ocean's 12. So we called up Soderbergh, and, they sat down, they went through it, and they decided that, like, yeah, this is going to be Ocean's 12. So George Nolfi, the writer for Ocean's 12, originally working on this other movie, is now writing Ocean's 12.
Right.
They had to think of an excuse for getting all these characters back together again, right? Which, I mean, when I was watching Ocean's 12, I didn't really like it, and I still do think it's the worst of the three. But looking back, that Ocean's 12 is actually doing a lot of really interesting stuff with like the concept of metafiction, like metafilm and metatextuality, I guess you can say. It's not a text, but yeah, we'll get into that because I don't know, I'm just sort of interested in that stuff. But it's doing some very interesting things. But we can talk about the making of it before we get into some of that.
Yeah, well, so with regards to casting, it's just like, let's get everybody back again.
Yeah, and they did. There was no one recast. They were able to get
thankfully.
everyone back.
Bruce Willis's character, apparently they offered that part to Russell Crowe. And
No, really? I didn't read that.
Well, I'm not sure if that was the part. There was a part in, I believe, Ocean's 12, where they offered Russell Crowe a part, and he's like, why would I come into a movie and say like 3 lines opposite Brad Pitt and George Clooney when I can go be the lead in my own movie at home? So, yeah.
Wow, that's kind of lame. Kind of a bad attitude there.
Brad Pitt, Bruce Willis apparently was like pretty down with being in this movie. He's like, yeah, I really want to be in this movie. And he plays himself which I think
Yeah.
is like really funny.
As does Julia Roberts in this movie. And Bruce Willis, I don't remember if we mentioned it, but was originally considered for Ocean
Yeah,
in the
we
first
did
one.
mention it. And
So
so
I mean, that's kind of a trend where actors who were originally considered for a part, if the movie has a sequel, they're offered like another role.
we forgot to mention that Johnny Depp was considered for the part of Linus originally too.
Jesus, glad that didn't happen.
Yeah, I actually think Matt Damon does that part pretty much perfectly, Linus. Otherwise, in regards to casting for the second movie, there isn't really much because when you have such a big ensemble cast that you carry from movie to movie, there's not going to be a lot of new characters that you're going to introduce.
Right, and like we mentioned, they
Yeah.
they brought all the actors back, so there's no real interesting recasting stories or anything.
No, there is the
There,
Night Fox though, who they introduce, who is played by
it has a Catherine Zeta-Jones in it.
right,
whatever her
Catherine
name is.
Zeta-Jones as Rusty's quote girlfriend unquote,
Yeah, his ex-girlfriend.
and then Vincent Castle is the Night Fox. Catherine Zeta-Jones is another big name.
I don't even know who Vincent Castle is.
I don't know who Vincent Castle is
Is
either.
is he French or is that just an accent?
Well, we can-
Oh, we didn't mention Don Cheadle's accent in the first one, which has been universally panned as one of the worst accents like ever.
Vincent Castle's a well-known French actor, apparently.
Okay.
Best known in English-speaking countries for Oceans 12 and 13. He's married to Monica Bellucci. Well, he was. They divorced in 2013. Yeah, Don Cheadle's accent is garbage, but he keeps it up through the second and third movies, even though people told him it was terrible. He even mentioned this. He was like, yeah, I have friends from, like, that part of England, and they came up to me and were like, dude, your accent is the worst accent I've ever heard.
And he was like, "Oh man, I thought I studied extensively for this." And what's weird, I guess I just don't know what. I don't even know what. I guess it's a Cockney accent. I just don't know what a Cockney accent sounds like. I guess because when I was watching it, I was like, "Wait, is Don Cheadle even American?"
Yes, he is. Although we did have to look that up while the movie was going on. Pull up
Yeah.
his IMDb page.
Yeah. So I didn't necessarily think it was that bad because I guess I don't know what it's really supposed to sound like. But I guess not that.
It sounded a little bad to me because it sounded a little forced, like he was like trying to force it out, and I was like, But yeah, props to him for keeping it up for the second and third movies for continuity at least, even if it's a terrible accent.
They didn't even need to make Don Cheadle's character British.
Oh, I think he said that was a choice he made.
What? Oh God! Yeah, his costume actually is one of the most out of place in the first movie because he's. I'm just remembering this now, but I read that Don Cheadle himself said it was inspired by sort of like British archetype of like a vagabond who is also like a gentleman or whatever.
Gentleman rogue.
Yeah, think of the foxes from Pinocchio, like that.
Oh,
Which
boy.
might be, when your first comparison for it is a cartoon character.
Oh
Yeah.
boy. Ay.
Anyway, Ocean's 12. So this movie that they sort of appropriated the script from was set in Europe. And this is actually pretty coincidental because Soderbergh was in Europe
Right.
just doing something totally different.
Yeah.
And he was like, what would be a good movie to set in Europe? Ocean's 12. And he was called up and they're like, hey, we're doing Ocean's 12 and it's going to be set in Europe.
And he was like, great, I'm already here. Send everybody over. Fly them all out here. They had to come up with a flimsy excuse, too, to get them over to Europe in the movie, though. And they were just like, we've got too much heat in America. That didn't seem to stop them in the third movie. But anyway.
Yeah, the third movie actually had, like, the way it's shot and, like, the coloration of it is, like, it feels, or it looks really hot. It's set in Vegas,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the things that I want to talk about later in these movies. Is that there's not actually a lot of similarity in like visual style between all three movies, even though they're all directed by Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah, no, there's not. I mean, we can talk about that in the Ocean's 13.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they got everyone over to Europe.
I'm trying to remember when this story happened, but Julia Roberts told this story about how there was a prank war between George Clooney and Brad Pitt.
Yeah, that was on the first one, I think.
No, it was the second one. It was Ocean's 12 because Julia Roberts was pregnant, and that's part of the reason why the script talks about how Julia Roberts is pregnant is because Julia Roberts actually was pregnant at the time with twins.
Yep.
And she had a suitcase that was too heavy, so she didn't want to carry it down to a car. So Brad Pitt, being a gentleman, carried her suitcase to her car for her, right? And
Oh
then
God, where is this going?
oh God, like she got to her hotel and her suitcase was like really heavy, and she's like, "What the hell?" And she pulled out this massive, heavy bronze statue, and she's like, "What?" And apparently, George Clooney,
Pulled off his own heist in real life. And
George
he stole
Clooney,
a bronze statue. No.
George Clooney thought that Brad Pitt was carrying his own suitcase, so he put the statue in the suitcase because he thought it was Brad Pitt's suitcase. And then it turned out to be Julia Roberts' suitcase. And then she said she got revenge with itching powder, but she didn't specify how or when. Yeah, she just said that the story involved itching powder.
There was another story, and I think this is from the first one, or it might be from the second one, where Brad Pitt told everyone, like cast and crew, that George Clooney wanted to be called Mr. Ocean, like even off camera, off set, which he didn't. He didn't request that apparently.
Yeah, thankfully.
Looks like most of these are Brad Pitt's doing.
Well, he's a prankster.
Is he known for like being a prankster?
Yeah, I don't know. And
anyway, the second one came out and was basically not very well liked.
No,
because it does something completely different from the first one. But actually not.
I mean, the reason why I dislike it is not because of that. The reason why I dislike it is because of something else.
I mean, the reason, like I mentioned before, when I looked back on it, since I'm interested in like metafiction and other possibly pretentious garbage like that, I looked back on it and was like, wow, this movie's doing a lot of really cool things. Mm-hmm. I still don't like it, and I just didn't like it because it was just so boring to sit through and watch. Like,
yeah.
I just was not entertained while I was watching it. And even knowing like some of the twists and stuff at the end, I don't know if I would want to go back and watch this.
I wouldn't watch Oceans 12 again. Like, 11 and 13 I can easily see myself rewatching. 12 doesn't have a lot of rewatchability to me.
I would definitely watch 11 again. In fact, I want to watch 11 again. The only reason I might consider watching 12 again is to like really dive deep into, again, the metafictional stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was actually looking for stuff about this. I obviously just Googled Oceans 12 metafiction. There's like not that much stuff about it. So I was like, this has to be the subject of some academic writing of some sort because it's doing actually a lot of really cool stuff. So I even went on the MLA International Bibliography and there's basically nothing. So, if you listening to this want to be the first one out there to write academically about Oceans 12...
Or you could be the first one.
No, I'm not going to be the first one because I don't want to go back and watch Oceans 12 again and again and again. Also, I don't really write about movies. I don't know how to talk or write about movies. So
same way you talk about everything else.
Uninformedly?
Just pretend that you're the foremost expert.
But when I write, which I do because I study English, when I write about texts and books and stuff, I don't come at it from like an uninformed standpoint. But when I talk about movies, I do.
Yeah, well, maybe you'll have an interesting perspective on it.
I'm not a film studies student. I'm an English student. But yeah, I guess this is a good opportunity to dive into a lot of the, again, maybe pretentious metafictional stuff that's going on here, but I want to talk about it. And again, there's barely anything out there about it. So this podcast can be one of the first.
Great. Here we go.
Yeah, Oceans 12 is actually, it's, again, maybe not a fun movie to watch, but it's doing like some pretty cool stuff with like concerning itself with like the act of its own creation even, and like the concept of an audience and awareness that it's a film, like a meta film, I guess is what you'd call it. It questions like, it has actors playing themselves, obviously, like when does acting start? When does acting stop? Mm-hmm. What does acting mean beyond like or off camera? What's going on there? Again, I don't have any conclusions or even larger ideas about this because, again, I don't want to go back and rewatch Oceans 12. But I was reading this one article about it, which is one of the few articles out there about Oceans 12 and metafiction, which references Tristram Shandy, the 2007 movie version, which has actors playing themselves. And Tristram Shandy, if you don't know what it is this 18th century book, which I've never read because I think it's about 1,800 pages or something. Jesus. It's about this guy named Tristram Shandy, and the concept of the book is he's writing his own life, right? It's he's starting at his birth and getting to wherever he is now. But he takes like a couple hundred pages to even get to being born, and it's about like it's not about it's supposedly about his life story, right? But it's actually about him writing his life story. So
yeah.
Sort of metatextual there, but it's also about digression, which is actually a huge concept if you look at like the continuum of metafictional canonical books. which I've read a lot of because again I'm interested in it and I read like more than I should, I guess. I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe there's no limit to how much you should read or should not. But like Tristram Shandy is part of this sort of metafictional, not revival, but like when the novel was first starting, a lot of early novels like Tristram Shandy, which is by Henry Fielding, and Henry Fielding's other, it's not a novel, but it's sort of it's a parody of Pamela, which is one of the first English novels by Samuel Richardson. And Henry Fielding has this parody of it called Shamala, and those two in conversation are very interested in like what a novel is, right? Because novel as a word doesn't even describe what it is; it just means new. It's a new form of writing that sort of emerged. Well, people debate. Some people say Don Quixote is the first novel, and some people say it's this Japanese text whose name I'm forgetting right now, Tales of Genji, I think, or something like that, which I've never read. I have read Don Quixote, which is awesome. Plugging it. I'm going to be plugging a lot of stuff here because if anyone's interested in reading like I am, then a lot of this stuff is my recommendations. So, but like this early period where the novel was first like working out what it is and forming is obviously maybe related to like what a text actually is.
Right.
Which was just interesting that this article mentioned the movie form of this book that, I've been reading a lot of 18th century stuff lately, so maybe that's why I'm just interested in it. But if you're interested in other sort of metafictional books that are about digression and about textuality and about writing itself, I don't know about movies, even though this is a movie podcast, so I'm not going to recommend any movies except hey, Tristram Shandy, the 2007 one. But if you're interested in books, there's this really awesome one called The Back Room by Carmen Martin Gaite, and it's a Spanish novel. It came out in like the 70s, so it came out right after Francisco Franco fell out of power in Spain. So it's really political, so it's about that, but it's also about this woman who you find out on like the last page is named Carmen Martin Gaite. It's about her struggle with like digression in the books she writes. And this is really trippy. Out of everything I'm going to recommend here, you got to read this book because it's like mind-bendingly strange and just weird, and yeah, it's crazy. It's really good. But like, yeah, if you're interested in other sort of, I guess, text and translation that also deal with metafiction, newer ones, even contemporary ones, there's a couple really cool ones that came out recently. Frankenstein in Baghdad by, hold on, I wrote down all the authors' names because I'm not going to remember them. Ahmed Sawadi, so that's an Iraqi text. It's about post-war Baghdad, also really political, and it takes cues from Frankenstein, if you couldn't guess by the name.
I was going to say, it's probably named intentionally.
Yeah, it's really cool. There's also Kamel Daoud's The Meursault Investigation, which is a response to The Stranger by Albert Camus. So this is an Algerian writer, right, originally published in Arabic. So it's in translation. The translation came out recently, very recently, actually. Another really cool book. Yeah, again, if you couldn't tell, I just really like reading. And there's another one pretty cool. Recently came out. I haven't read it yet. It's called Seventh Function of Language. It's by a pretty famous French writer whose name I'm forgetting.
Oh, don't look at me.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
I watch movies like you read books.
Yeah, I read a lot, but yeah, that's just what it reminded me of. But honestly, even more than that, and I find this kind of strange actually, Oceans 12 reminded me of this Japanese sort of text adventure kind of game called Ever 17, which came out in the mid-2000s, which is also just like, it's really cool. It's like mind-bendingly trippy. It's like this science fiction story, and it's so cool.
Right.
And Metal Gear Solid 2, which is like if you're talking about metafiction in video games, you're talking about Metal Gear Solid 2, which weirdly came out around the same time as Oceans 11. But yeah.
Probably unrelated.
But who wants to deal with, who wants to deal with that franchise that has its head stuck so far up its own ass at this point that, yeah. Whatever.
Isn't that franchise over now because Kojima left?
Well, it's over in the hearts of the fans.
Okay. I don't know anything about it, so.
I mean, it's still going on, just not with Kojima. That's why everyone doesn't want to be. That's why nobody wants to play it anymore. I was over it years ago anyway, so.
Anyway.
Yeah, those are just my recommendations. Just wanted to plug a bunch of stuff. Just wanted to really pat my own back there with how much I've read. And
check the show notes for all those recommendations because That way you won't have to scroll back 10 minutes to find out what they were. I know
But
when
Ocean's
I know well I know whenever I listen to a podcast and someone recommends something, they always talk about how good it is. I'm like, oh man, yeah, I want to check that out. But then they don't say the name of the thing again after the initial recommendation, and I don't want to have to scroll back to find it. And I'm always like, damn, I really wish they put in the show notes what the recommendation was.
Yeah, I'll do that. Anyway, back to Ocean's 12, which all I wanted to say is actually doing some really cool stuff with these sort of concepts.
Well, yeah, because there's Bruce Willis playing himself, and then there's Julia Roberts playing Tess Ocean playing Julia Roberts.
Yeah, and also when you think about Ocean's 11, the movie is about like this heist that's sort of a trick within itself, right? It's just footage from the facsimile they made, and like this is also because metafiction is so related to like semiotics and stuff like that. This concept of like making a fake is also pretty important. When you go into the second one, the entire thing basically is just this sham.
Well, then there's the third one, which is just let's make Ocean's 11 again, but
worse,
but different.
Well, because people didn't like the second one, and this is actually weird because we were just talking about this on Trust Your Doctor, our Doctor Who podcast. It reminds me of like the Metal Gear series, right? Where Metal Gear Solid 1 was really huge and everyone loved it. So then Metal Gear Solid 2 like came out and sold really well, and that one was kind of different. It was doing weird things and different things, and people didn't like it. So that caused the third one to not sell as well. And seems like a similar situation where they tried to return to form with the third one.
It's it's definitely another representation of how the box office of a movie reflects how good the previous movie was and not how good this one
critical
is.
Reception too, because Ocean's 12 was maybe not panned or hated, but definitely not as well received as 11, as it shouldn't be, because it's not as good of a movie, in my opinion at least.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like nowadays, 2018, I feel like the marketing cycle, there's so much marketing now that it's less true that the reaction or box office gross of a movie is a reaction to the previous one, just because we're so inundated with advertising and marketing and everybody's so connected and there's so much word of mouth now that I feel like if a movie is good now, it's more likely that movie will reflect it in its own box office than the next movie. But definitely back in 2001, 4, and 7, it was definitely more prevalent how, Ocean's 13 doesn't make a lot of money, but it's like Ocean's 13 is superior to Ocean's 12 in basically every way.
Well, trailers also now have become a lot bigger of a deal because people watch them online and stuff now, whereas before you might only watch a trailer in theaters or you might just watch a commercial for the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely that interconnectedness, I think. And also I think just in general, the movie making process has sped up and has become just so transparent that it's really difficult to go into a movie without having heard anything about it. I mean, you hear 2 years out when a movie starts production, it's like, oh, this movie's starting production right now, which just means we're going to start filming now. But it seems like it's a big news cycle every time a big movie starts production, right? So,
yeah, well, there's definitely a group. I don't do this because I don't really keep up with the news or anything about it, but there's definitely a lot of people out there who will go to movie news sites and get every little bit of information about every movie that's coming out, and that's very different than what was available. I mean, there's magazines and stuff like that, before the internet became as ubiquitous as it is now, but it's a very different sort of way to explore like the pre-production of the movie.
I mean, I do that, but I didn't used to do that. And I think, it's a very different way to experience the movie as well. When you go into the movie, you feel like you know a lot of how this movie got to where it is, and you have certain expectations about it, which potentially undermines my enjoyment of the movie and has actually definitely undermined my enjoyment of at least one movie in the past year. But to an extent, I also like knowing, I have directors and writers who I think make good movies, so I want to keep up with what's their next movie so I can go and see it and because typically they make things that I like, so I try to follow the creators that I like Steven Spielberg. What's Steven Spielberg going to be making next? Or if
but you can do that without going into the details of the movie, the pre-production, the
which is why
I
tend to try to stay away from this movie's starting production, because I'm like, okay, I don't really care about that. I just want to know who's making what movie and when does it come out, right?
Yeah.
It's like, James Wan is doing Aquaman. I think James Wan is a good director, so I think I'll go see Aquaman, right? It's things like that.
Yeah. I typically don't look up much. I mean, when I watch a movie, I'll watch a movie, and if I think it's really good, then I'll go look up how it was made.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's sort of a inverse process there. But I mean, if I haven't even watched the movie yet, and I don't even know if I'm gonna like it, I'm not necessarily that interested in how it was made. But
I mean, I also like to look for like certain, I guess, signatures that directors have, which I guess is tied into the thing that I wanted to mention about these movies not looking very visually similar. But like, if I look up a movie and it's like, oh, Alexander Display is doing the score, then I know that the score is probably going to be really unique and really fitting for the movie. If I look up the score and it's Steve Jablonsky who does Transformers, I know it's going to be really intense but also really generic at the same time, right? So
right, we didn't even mention the music for Oceans 11 and 12,
mm-hmm.
which maybe we should now. So they were done by, I forget his name, but he's I think a Northern Irish composer.
David Holmes?
Yeah, David Holmes
did
12, I think he did all of them.
11.
Pretty sure he did all of them.
Yeah, he did.
So, again, I think Northern Irish, and I thought it was great. I thought the soundtrack in these movies were fantastic, all three of them. Even though I didn't like 12 and 13 as much, I thought the soundtracks were some of the best parts of those movies.
Yeah. No, I think the music in these movies was great. It really fit the movies.
Yeah, it really fit the setting of Vegas, and could have easily just gone with sort of a generic sort of movie score for this, but totally didn't.
It's really glitzy.
Right.
And I mean, I couldn't hum any of the tunes to you right now. I don't remember any of them. But it was very fitting. Yeah, really well composed, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned glitzy. One of the things Soderbergh has said about this series is that it portrays like the good side of Vegas. You don't get into any of the like super criminal underworld stuff, right, which I kind of disagree with that. I don't think it necessarily portrays Vegas in that great of a light. Although there are definitely movies and just real events and stories and books and out there that do a lot worse than Oceans 11 does.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
yeah, we can sort of get into the third one now since we've been talking about other stuff.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about the third one. As in most franchises, the third one has the least interesting stuff about it because for some reason, when the second one is made, the third one is almost always a given. You almost never see a movie series that's only two movies, right?
Yeah, I can't even think of any off the top of my head.
So it's two. It's almost always three or more.
Yep.
So, I mean, they got Al Pacino to play Bank, which is a huge name because Al Pacino is a huge name in Hollywood. He's a really well-known actor.
Other than that, they got everyone back.
Amazingly, again, they got the entire ensemble back, except for Julie Roberts' Tess and Catherine Zeta-Jones' whatever her name was.
But that was a product of the script, I think, rather than them not wanting or being able to come back.
As far as I know, yeah. There wasn't a place for them in the script. And when you watch the movie, yeah, it's really obvious there's not a place for them in that movie.
Yeah, there's already a lot going on in that movie, which sort of brings me into why I didn't really like it because, say what you want about Ocean's 12, at least it sort of expanded on the heist and trickery stuff that was going on in Ocean's 11, but Ocean's 13 feels like it just completely threw all that away, like it was trying to be Ocean's 11, but it gave the plan away before anything even happened.
Really? I thought it was the opposite. I feel like Ocean's 13, I liked Ocean's 13 like a lot. Not as much as I liked Ocean's 11, but I liked 13 a lot because unlike the other two, they set up the heist at the beginning, right at the beginning.
I didn't like it.
And then they just, the rest of the movie, the entire rest of the movie is the heist. And I really liked that. Like, I thought that was a good direction to take it, and I liked that was different than the other two movies.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's exactly why I didn't like it, so, yeah.
I mean, that's just us differing on what we like in sequels again, right? Like, you typically want them to do the same things that worked, and I typically want them to try to take the franchise in a new direction.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I guess that can segue into how it works as a trilogy, and I can talk about why I personally just really, really despise 12 compared to the other two. Not despise, but like really dislike. But I think
I really dislike it. I mean, I've been talking. It seems like I'm talking up 12 and hating on 13, but if I had to go back and rewatch any of those, it would probably be 13.
Yeah. Well, so like my problem with 12 is that in 11 and 13, there's like the reveal at the end, right? And in 13, it's not that big. It's just the reveal that they knew the Night Fox was going to be there. And in the first one, it's the reveal that they made off with the money before, disguised as the SWAT team.
Yeah.
But in 12, the reveal is like, oh, they talked with the Night Fox's mentor, and they actually already stole the egg on the
Yeah, it
train.
was a reveal that like basically more than half the movie was the heist,
It was,
basically.
well, the thing about
Essentially.
my problem with that reveal though is that, the reveal in 13 and the reveal in 11 are like, you can figure out those reveals from information that's already been presented to you. The reveal in 12, there's absolutely zero probability that you figure out that reveal at all. There was no way you could know that Rusty and Ocean talked with,
Sure, yeah.
the head criminal dude, found out the egg was being transported on a train, and then stole the egg on the train. Because you never see the train, you only see them arrive.
Yeah.
You only see them at the train station, right? They never tell you that they took a train.
Yeah, and that again I think has to do with some of the like weird and trippy metafictional stuff this is doing. Like, who is the heist in this movie really for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not going to go too deeper into that because I'm not really able to, or I don't even want to. But
Well, I just
yeah,
think
it's like it's like Agatha Christie compared to Sherlock. Actually, that's not a good example because both Arthur Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie have stories you can't figure out and stories you can. But it's like
right.
it's like the Agatha Christie or Conan Doyle stories. Some of them you can figure out what the reveal is with the information. Those are the better ones. And sometimes it's just out of nowhere, and you're like, "What, really?"
Yeah, exactly. And that's
I feel
exactly,
like that happens more in Agatha Christie, but maybe I'm just wrong.
and that's kind of how I feel about the second one. Is that, the third one and the first one, when you get the reveal and you get the heist, you, especially in Oceans 11, you want to go back and you want to watch it because you want to see if you can pick up on clues for the reveal, right? That's how I felt anyway.
Well, that one's kind of it's pretty simple what they did in that
It's
one.
pretty simple,
So,
but like, I'd still want to go back and see if I could pick up on the clues, right? And the third one as well. And I mean, these movies don't do a great job of making you want to go back and find the clues because the reveals aren't super complex. But like a movie like Arrival, you watch Arrival, and then once you get the resolution, you're like, oh, I want to go back and watch the whole movie again because I want to find out if I missed anything.
yeah, sure.
But like Ocean's 12, I think, does that the poorest in this movie because you get the reveal and you're like, there's absolutely no way I could have figured that out. Like, it doesn't make me want to go back and watch it because I know there's no hints to it at all there, except for the fact that they're at the train station. But how are you supposed to figure out that they robbed the train, basically,
Sure, yeah.
just from the fact that they're at the train station?
My reasoning behind being able to go back and watch this movie is like seeing what that is actually doing in the movie. The fact that you can't figure out what it is, like, that seems to be some sort of evolution of what's going on in the first one.
Evolution or potentially a mistake to me.
I don't know.
I mean,
I don't see because I don't see it as I don't know what I think about it.
I mean, I'd have to
honestly.
go back and watch it again and see how the movie plays out, knowing what's going to happen, right? Because I feel like there's two unique experiences you can have watching a movie. There's the experience of watching the movie without knowing what's going to happen, and then watching it again when you know what's going to happen.
Or watching it for the first time if you know what's going to happen. I think that's another experience entirely.
I mean, that's an experience that's really new because, like you said, trailers are so ubiquitous now, and there's so much information out there. You can know what's going to happen in the movie.
It's not. I mean, you could have a movie spoiled like in the past.
I mean,
as well,
and that too,
so.
but it's more likely now.
Yeah, it's
is
more
what I'm
likely
saying.
now.
It's more common now that you go into a movie for the first time and still know what's going on.
Sure.
But like, I am curious to watch these movies again, probably more so than most of the other trilogies we've done, to see, how they feel and how they play out, knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, same here. I mean, mainly for Oceans 11. I don't know if I want to go back and watch 12 and 13.
I mean, I really enjoyed 13, so I have no problem with watching 11 and 13 again. But overall, as a trilogy, I think that, I don't know if it really works that well.
I don't think it works that well.
I mean,
I think, I don't know. I think 13 is the one that throws a wrench in it, though.
I think it's
Whereas I
both
think-
12 and 13, to be honest. I think the fact that they're both like kind of disjointed from each other and then also disjointed from 11 undermines the whole thing. Like 12 feels like they just slapped it on without any care for how it connects to 11. It feels almost like a
I
standalone.
completely disagree with that.
And 13 feels like they just tried to do 11 again, which then when you've already done 12 is like,
To me, 13 is the one that they just slapped on without any care to what was built up in 11 and 12.
I mean, the setup for 13 is definitely slapdash. Oh, Ruben's having a heart attack because his buddy cheated him out of his hotel, so we got to rob his hotel. I mean, but what could you have done for 13? I was like thinking about this. What could you have done for 13 that would fit into the trilogy? What they should have probably done is go somewhere else entirely. They've done Vegas, they've done Europe. Maybe they should have gone somewhere, where would be interesting to go? They could have gone somewhere like India,
Asia, yeah.
somewhere in Asia. They could have gone to Dubai even if they wanted
Sure,
to.
yeah.
That would have been a really interesting movie, I think, potentially, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have. Especially because it's also in a desert-like location, so
Right.
like Las Vegas is.
You would get that parallel back to Oceans 11, but you would be different. It wouldn't be the same movie. But yeah, it just doesn't really work as a trilogy.
No, it doesn't. Well, the first one, Ocean's 11, is absolutely great. I would really recommend watching that. And then
I would definitely recommend Oceans 11 too. I think if you're curious about 12, and I think if you're curious about 12, watch it. I think I would recommend 13. I think you can watch 13 standalone from 12.
sure. You can skip 12, honestly.
Yeah, you can really skip 12 if you want to. And that's the thing is like 11 and 13. 11 and 13, I think, work as a duology. 11 and 12, I think, work as a duology. 11, 12, and 13, I don't think work as a trilogy. Because I think...
Yeah, I might agree. Yeah, maybe.
Because if you just watch 11 and 13, then they never leave Vegas, right? They just
Sure.
keep heisting Vegas.
I mean, it's obvious from like a few pieces of dialogue that something else happened in between, but you can just
But
ignore
barely
that. You
any.
can just ignore that.
I mean, yeah, you just have to ignore that Rusty had a girl, because they mentioned her briefly at the beginning, and then really the Night Fox, but you don't really need any
Yeah, you
introduction to him. He's just another thief, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so expanded universe, Oceans stuff.
Oh, we never talked about the visual style changes.
That's right. And that's
Which also plays into how they worked.
Yeah, that's
good
what I
as
was
a
going to say.
trilogy or not.
That kind of plays into how I don't think it works as a trilogy, partially because they're like super visually different from each other,
And that's
which I think is Steven Soderbergh being really experimental between all of them.
it is, and it's also just like think about where they take place. Right, the first one is on the Vegas Strip and in casinos, basically for the entire movie,
Right.
almost the entire movie. Second one is in a couple different European cities. So already right off the bat, no matter what directing style, no matter what you try and do with it, it's going to look different.
Right.
And the third one's back in Vegas, but it doesn't look
The third one has
quite similar to
really
that.
different like color grading to the first one, and I'm always hang on. I want to see if they have the same cinematographer. Oh, they do. That's really interesting to me, because I would think if they had the same cinematographer, they'd make an effort to make them look really similar. I did read about the cinematography of the first movie, and the guy talked a lot about how each, going along with each character having their color for their costume, they have a similar thing for like the location that they're met at, and so like Ruben's house is in the desert, so it's very the blue skies, palm trees, and very dusty. And he's wearing a sand-colored suit because that's like
He needs to blend
that's
in.
like Ruben's color. So like the background is all very sandy, and the house is sandy. But anyway, the visuals are like really different between the three movies, which I find really interesting because they're directed by the same person, and typically there'll be similarities you can pick out between movies by the same director.
I guess that just has to do with Steven Soderbergh being an experimental director who doesn't rest on his laurels.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I appreciate that. I think that maybe then his visual style is to change his visual style in every movie. I know that sounds kind of like weird. And
The only thing consistent about him is that he's inconsistent.
yeah. I mean, there are directors like that. Like we mentioned, Steven Spielberg tries to direct each movie how the movie wants to be shot, but there were definitely
like I've mentioned,
yeah,
there's a Spielberg touch.
there was definitely like a Spielberg through thread, I guess, through all his movies that you can pick out.
Yeah, he can follow the thread, unlike... never mind.
Like, I don't know. If I didn't know these were all directed by Steven Soderbergh, I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't know it. If I didn't know that they were directed by the same person,
I would say they're directed by three different people.
yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to tell you that they were directed by the same person if I just watched all three. Which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I know it sounds like I'm ragging on that, but I actually kind of like it. Because part of the reason why I like the Mission Impossible franchise so much is because every movie is basically directed by a different person, so they all look really different. Anyway.
Yeah, as for expanded universe stuff, like we mentioned, this is based on an earlier movie.
Mm-hmm.
Came out in the early 60s, I believe.
Yes, I believe so. I will find out for you.
1960.
1960. Yeah, exactly 1960, actually.
Yep. And I mean, like we also mentioned before, there's a new one coming out, Oceans 8, which is sort of a sequel, spin-off, reboot.
Yeah,
type thing.
apparently Linus, so Matt Damon's character, shows up in a cameo appearance in Oceans 8,
That's good.
kind of connecting the universe a
Like
little
Matt
bit.
Damon's character in these.
There's another character who's going to show up in Oceans 8. I remember too. Carl Rayner. Oh, he plays Saul. So Saul's also showing up in a cameo appearance in Oceans 8. Apparently, they considered doing an Oceans 14, but they couldn't really find a script that worked. And then also, what was his name?
Weintraub?
Bernie Mac ended up dying in 2008.
Right.
And they didn't feel right to them to continue with the franchise without one of the main characters. So.
Sure.
And we were watching Oceans 13. We noticed that Frank didn't do a lot in Oceans 13. And then I found out later on that he'd actually been sick for many years before he died in 2008. And I theorized that maybe the reason why he doesn't show up so much in Oceans 13 is maybe because he was dealing with that sickness. But we won't know.
He died soon after. He died like the next year, I think.
Yeah, he did.
So I mean, other than the original movie and Ocean's 8, I don't really know if there is anything.
I don't believe there is anything else. I think that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's even any books or anything.
What would you write about, really?
You could just novelize the movie. That's what I was thinking. So
that's true. Movie novelizations have really fallen out of style, haven't they?
Well, reading has really fallen out of popularity.
So. I mean, that's true. Yeah, well, anyway, you can email us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Google Play at Triple Play. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook. Trust your doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. And next time, for the .5 episode for this, we're watching the original Oceans 11, the original 1960 movie. But then the trilogy we're covering after that is going to be the first 3 Purge movies. But until then, the end.